place where East meets West. From the bicameral fissure of the global mind, from the Eastern Bloc to American rock. Welcome to At This Moment on freedomslips.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Thursday's edition of At This Moment. It is the 26th of March, 2015, and I'm Angela Black, in case you didn't know, and I'm here every week at 10 p.m. Eastern on Studio B, here on the number one 100% listener-supported radio station on the planet and possibly beyond. And, of course, we are listener-supported, so the way to keep us, keep this boat floating, keep us alive, keep the truth movement happening is to, of course, find the donate button on the side of the chat room at the homepage, freedomslips.com, or on the top of the homepage at the site support button. We have many different ways, awesome prizes for your donations. I highly recommend that you do check into how to keep the free speech movement alive. And it's so funny that I would even call it a movement. It's everyone's given right, I believe, to talk and say what you want and all that kind of stuff. So and in that realm, I'm very excited to welcome to the show tonight a very hot celeb of the moment, and in general a wonderful woman who's found herself in an interesting time and space in the world based on her history with a particular individual that we'll be talking about in a minute, and other than that, also a delightful human who has brought her mission to bring the truth to the American citizens alive. She is here with me now. It's Mia Marie Pope, everyone. Welcome to the show, Mia.
Oh, hi. Thank you for having me, Angela. You have such a wonderful show. It is a pleasure. We're all just doing our part just to, get things, like you say, moving along, and then hopefully we can wake some people up. I think we've got some excellent topics to cover this evening, and I think your listening audience will appreciate the information we're going to bring them tonight.
Absolutely. And, I've been doing some research on you, and of course, you're all over the internet. If you guys go in and type in Google or wherever you search your internet stuff and type in Mia Marie Pope, you will find a bevy of interviews that have been archived on YouTube, etc., where Mia is basically has found herself in the odd space and time of being a person who knew Barack Obama as a teenager. I'm getting some feedback there. Is that maybe a breath? I'm not sure if your landline is very sensitive. By the way, it's kind of sounding like.
Yeah, I'm getting a little interruption, too, by the way. I don't know if we'll have to switch over to a cell. We can, but there's a lot of interruption probably coming from your Skype line, just to mention that in advance.
All right, great. I will have that. I'll put that out to the chat room. People who are listening in the chat, hello to all of you. And if you can let me know if we are having audio problems, that would be great. Okay. All right. So, yeah, here you are. You're in Hawaii. It's in the 70s, and basically, and that's how this whole thing starts. Let me also let everyone know that you're not selling anything. Okay, you're not. You don't have a book, and not that that's a bad thing. I mean, if you have a book, that's great too. But this odd path that you found yourself on has really no base in profit making. You are finding yourself in this position because of an odd moment in time, and then the realization that it is, I guess, a duty of yours to bring to light what you know. Yes.
Sure. I've never made a nickel on the umpteen interviews that I've done, and like you said, I don't have a book, I don't have a website or any of that stuff. And how this sort of started is I was in a unique place at a unique time, and the very first show that radio show I did, it went viral, and then the other shows picked it up, and it exponentially grew from there. And so it really is coming from the heart. As for your listening audience, I'm not foolish enough to think that we have a two-party system in this country. The left-right paradigm is kind of two wings of the same ugly bird. So I'm not coming from a Republican standpoint against the Democrats or vice versa. And it's certainly not coming from a racial thing. I love my brothers and sisters of color, and even the alternative lifestyle, being that Barry is gay. If that were all that we were talking about of what Barry likes to do with his boyfriends, that's really not a concern to me. But the motivation motivation is one of is that the pirates have taken over the ship, and we all have our duty, our own civic duty, to do our part. I just felt sick to my stomach having the information that I had about Barry's past, and then just sitting on it and not sharing that with the American people, being that the American people have been lied to so profoundly by Barry. So, that's the motivation.
Interesting. And it's also very brave of you, seeing as how a lot of people are off when they start talking about this type of thing. And obviously I'm not wishing that upon you. The reason that you have been able to speak freely is I think because they didn't see you coming.
They didn't see me coming. I flew out of nowhere and they didn't have time to stop me. And so by the time, now I'm sure my file is sitting on somebody's desk for sure in these intelligence agencies, or probably Valerie Jarrett's desk probably. But now my numbers are over 5 million on the internet. So, they were a little slow on the uptake trying to get to me first. So that's probably why, I'm still able to do things. But believe me, I'm an armed person. I keep my eyes open. I'm a very cognizant person. And I don't doubt that, who knows how things go. But the scenario is that, we all have a choice to make. So, if you back me up in a corner, I've got one of two things to do. I'm either going to fight you or surrender, and surrender's not in my nature. So the more they push, the angrier I get. The more they push, the more interviews I'm going to do. They're not going to outgut me on this.
That's
so
awesome.
It's just a matter of, I'm not going to surrender to this disgusting criminality that's going on, and I'm not going to passively sit back and watch my country get flushed down the toilet.
Yeah, exactly. At least you're going to speak out about it. Yeah. Well, that's good. Now, and speaking of what is in your nature, upon listening to that interview, in specific, the Hagman and Hagman interview that you did last month, I heard that you were raised by an interesting set of parents. Your father was connected into the world of Freemasons and the Knights of Columbus.
Yeah.
And you were very keen.
Those two camps don't get together too often. But he was quite an operator. He died in 1994. He was it was ruled a suicide. It was a shotgun to the head. So either he had it done to him or he did it himself. I'm more inclined to think it was done to him. This information was put together kind of eclectically as far as his criminal behavior. I had to kind of do some digging and some research. But as far as him schooling me on the secret societies and all of the sacred knowledge and all that stuff regarding the Masonry, that was fed to me from a very early age throughout my life. So I'm as schooled on these subjects as any 33rd degree Mason. Wow. I know all the handshakes. I know all the the sacred geometry, the whole thing, the lingo, everything. So even though he was technically not supposed to be sharing that information with me, he was a renegade like that. So yeah, I was raised by an operator.
And you're no slouch. You were also kind of trained, as you were mentioning, to spot character flaw, and that's kind of the beginning of this whole thing. You're a young person, you're in your teens. And you're just you're not completely coasting along oblivious to what's around you. You are able to.
That was some of my very first lessons. That's exactly right. It's called spotting a crack, and that was some of the very, very first things I remember. And it's really essentially is being able to read patterns and spot inconsistencies, and those are typical tools of the trade in stuff that my dad did. And so I guess, in retrospect, I suppose, he was trying to train me, but obviously, I would never, get involved in stuff like that, but I think that might have been the idea of kind of training me along the same lines.
Right. So
I can spot a crack. I can, it's really that experience shaped the way that I see the world. I have no illusions about how this world is run.
See, and that's a great base for what you're about to reveal, which is not new. I mean, you've been doing this for, I believe, about 5 years now, where you've been speaking out on this, and so we're gonna get to that right now. I think we're gonna go back to cut to what, 1977-ish, something like that. So you've got this background where you're keen, you are ready. You basically, whatever relationship you did have with your father, you took the good and left the bad, and basically were able to formulate opinions about other people, relatively accurately is what I'm gathering, even as a teenager. So cut to, you're in Hawaii, and then if you want to take us through, how did you, if everyone doesn't know what what I'm about to explore with Mia, is that Mia actually hung out in the same circles and actually knew Barack Obama, a.k.a. Barry Soetoro, back in the day. So I'm going to let you take it away, Mia, and let us know the history. Thank you.
Yeah, I was actually born in California, but I came to the island of Oahu as an infant. We lived in Waimanalo, and I lived there throughout my formative years. When it came time to go to kindergarten, it was thought that it'd be better if I went to a school on the mainland as opposed to a public school system in Hawaii, simply because Pidgin is spoken, and it's a term of endearment that everybody speaks Pidgin, but it sounds awfully ignorant to a mainland ear. And so the thought was, if I couldn't, I wouldn't ever learn to speak proper English, is what the idea was. So every summer I would be in Hawaii, and then for the school year I would be in California. And because of my dad's front job, he was a musician. He really was a musician, but that was part of what he did. We traveled back and forth from California to Hawaii, and so I didn't come across Barry until 1977, and this was in the summer when we were both out of school, and myself and my little group of friends, we would just hang out, whether it be at the beach or the park. There's a park by the zoo, there's different places we were just some bunch of teenagers that had a lot of time on our hands. We were very unsupervised, as many were during that time. Our parents just kind of let us run wild, basically. And so one of the characters that was on the periphery that would show up from time to time was Barry Soetoro. So I had an opportunity to observe him, and essentially you're talking about a guy, as mentally ill as we see Barry today. His brain was already sprung back then too. He was a pathological liar back then. He did drugs. He smoked coke. He smoked marijuana. I've never done coke in my life, but I did smoke marijuana back then. And he just had a hustler type quality to him. Always on the mooch, on the grift. He had a very close relationship with a drug dealer named Gay Ray, and coincidentally, Ray was gay, so the guy's real name was Raymond Boyer. And as with the characterization of all drug dealers, these are pretty brutal characters. I mean, you can't really be in that line of work and be a very nice person. And Gay Ray dealt everything. He dealt coke, he dealt marijuana, pills, you name it. Mm-hmm. And Barry used to brag that he had this cocaine, which was somewhat newsworthy because it was such an expensive item back then. If for those who lived in that era, cocaine was in its powder form. It was extraordinarily expensive. Barry was broke. He didn't have any liquid cash. By the way, he never worked at Baskin Robbins. That's a total lie. In other words, he was this broke kid like we all were, when none of us had cash in our pockets. And he would obtain cocaine from Gay Ray, in other words, trade sexual favors for the cocaine. And just to give your listening audience a little bit of an indication of who Gay Ray was, as I mentioned, Gay Ray did not pass out cocaine for free. You had to do something for him to be able to get this very expensive item. Remember, it was very expensive. I mean, multi-millionaire rock stars went broke on that drug. It's very expensive back in that time. Mm-hmm. And for example, I'll tell you, Gay Ray was murdered in 1987 by his gay lover. Just to give your audience a little bit of an idea, Gay Ray was such a brutal guy, such a criminal. He tormented this boyfriend of his so badly and drove the guy so nuts that the boyfriend grabbed a hammer and bashed Gay Ray's brains out with it and killed him. And the guy just recently got out of prison, I think about a year ago, after doing 25 years for killing Gay Ray. So if you, just to give the audience a little bit of a climate of, this wasn't a very nice person, Gay Ray. His name was Raymond Boyer, his real name, but his street name was Gay Ray. So Barry was so close with him that, like, for example, on Barry's yearbook in his senior year, he writes a message thanking Gay Ray for all of the good times in his yearbook, upon his senior graduation. So, it was a close relationship. And like I say, Gay Ray wasn't passing out the cocaine for free. Gay Ray had suppliers he had to pay, and so this was not, just give your audience an idea of who this guy was. Mm-hmm. So Barry, Barry was a coke whore back in the day, and so if you understood that, the chronological years, if you say, well, Barry was a teenager, you think, okay, you get a picture of, a certain type of mentality. Barry was already sprung. He was already turned out. He was already streetwise. He was already a hustler by that time.
Okay.
So whatever damage or trauma happened to him to turn him into a sociopath had already occurred by that time. Now, there's a genetic component to being a sociopath, so he could possibly be just an organic sociopath and just genetically predisposed to be one. That for whatever it was that made Barry nuts, it had already occurred by that time. So.
Wow. Okay. Now, how many summers were you in Hawaii around the same time as Barry?
3 years in a row for the time that I came across Barry, 77, 78, and 79. But I had been in Hawaii many previous summers prior to that. I just simply had not come across Barry until 77.
I see. And he went to a high school called, it started with a P. Punahou, yes. And that was it was a private high school?
Yeah, it's an elite prep school. And the information, at least that's been publicized, is that Barry came as a 10-year-old kid from Indonesia and somehow just waltzed into that school. Now, I've had many friends that have gone to Punahou, and I'm not a stranger to what that situation is. So first off, Barry, at least in 77, 78, 79, Barry portrayed himself as a foreign student. And that's why we thought that that's how he somehow magically got into Punahou. But let me tell you, that school has a waiting list very long. And for every slot that's open, there's 50 kids that are trying to get in there whose parents have money to pay. And it's a very expensive school, very, very expensive. So what their policy is, and this has been common knowledge to me, is that they don't even want to take you unless you start out from kindergarten. It's almost unheard of that you could get into that school at a mid stage. And there's reasons for that. They don't want influences coming from, other segments of the population. It's kind of like they want to groom you from your, being a little bitty kid and, have you just go through that way. So it's actually an unheard of thing. In fact, it really begs the question that Barry was installed by an external force into Punahou, because I can't imagine, knowing what I know about that school, that, he's just some kid from Indonesia filling out an application and somehow just waltzes in ahead of all these other people that are on the waiting list to get in. That makes absolutely no sense. So clearly there was some apparatus in place to have gotten him into that school.
Mm-hmm. Some type of financial
like I said, if he was just a civilian, basic, like you and I, and just filling out the application and just trying to get into that school, no way. Because like I say, people are on waiting lists since they're infants.
I see.
Parents are putting their kids on waiting lists to get into that school.
Okay, and also he did not have money on him at all times either. He lived in a very modest house or something like that.
Apartment, yeah. It was just a shabby walk up. And no, he didn't have cash. He was always mooching cigarettes, trying to bum money. he was the type that, oh, can I borrow a few bucks? I'll pay you on, and of course you would never see that money again. He was that type, he just a usury type of guy. So no, he was already, bumming stuff, and, he had no cash. And the reason I say that I know that he didn't, at least in the summers, I know that he didn't work at Baskin-Robbins because he basically owed everybody. So had he had a little job of some sort, I think we would have been all over that ice cream parlor trying to hit him up for free ice cream. You know what I mean? Because we were a bunch of little street urchin kids, It would have been hot news to say, oh, yeah, Barry's got a gig over at Baskin-Robbins, let's go see if we can get some free ice cream. Mm-hmm. And the other part that's absolutely ridiculous about the notion that Barry had a job is because Barry's, when your currency is being a liar and a hustler, mm-hmm. it's really hard to set the alarm, get up on time, push a mop, wipe the counters, be courteous to customers, not steal out of the cash register. All of that was already beyond Barry by that time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now...
in other words, if he ever was hired, he would have been fired in the next hour. He would have had his sticky fingers in the cash register.
Wow. All right. So now you did not, if I recall correctly, you were not a participant in the powder at all. You did smoke marijuana.
No.
Yeah. So.
By the grace of God, too. I mean, drugs were all around me, but I've just never, for whatever reason, I never did cocaine in my life. I've drank alcohol and I've smoked marijuana, but I never have done any drugs in my life. Mm-hmm. And that's just grace of God stuff. I don't know how I avoided that, really, because like I say, it was all around me.
Interesting. So your viewpoint, you guys basically hung out in the same circles, and then you interacted with him. Yes, I mean, I guess you were not, in a room, doing cocaine with him or smoking crack or anything like that. You were never. I don't believe you would have witnessed that if you were not using. But you heard from him firsthand, if I recall correctly, that that he was using.
Yeah, he bragged about having the cocaine. Mm-hmm. Because if you remember, if those who lived in that time, it was kind of a status symbol, simply because it was so expensive. It implied you had money. It was a little avant-garde. If people can maybe look at some of the old videos of that Studio 54 crowd, lots of polyester, big hair, cocaine, it was just kind of like that back then. And even the being gay part, which was common knowledge to us all, was a little bit avant-garde back then as well, because it was prior to AIDS showing up on the scene in America. We didn't really start to see AIDS rear its head until about 80, 81. And AIDS is what put the wet blanket on the gay community. Mm-hmm. But prior to that, it was, gay people were just raging, being very outwardly gay. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't a stigma. And at least it wasn't in that demography there. I mean, there was no stigma to being gay, and it was certainly no stigma to having cocaine.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so now you're in circles with him and you're interacting with him. And how would you characterize your relationship with him during those summers in Hawaii?
I would say adversarial. I mean, it's not like I was looking for trouble all the time or anything. And believe me, I've gotten my share of beefs because, this is just how it was. As being a Caucasian person, haole is not the color of choice in Hawaii. But I never got in a physical fight with him. But I did have an adversarial thing simply because Barry was so full of bull all the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, just the most outlandish, ridiculous lies constantly coming out of this guy's mouth. I do remember, I used to tell him to shut up. That's kind of like it's just kind of a pigeon thing, It's like we all tell each other, shut up, oh, shut up, you too, shut up. That was kind of like what we'd always say to each other. But I remember having like argument type scenarios with him. In other words, I would dismiss him. I guess I was kind of like a mean girl. I dismissed him like, just shut up, Barry. We're sick of your lies, just put a cork in it. Mm-hmm. So I remember that kind of stuff. I remember, another thing, I remember this word Mombasa floating around, which ties into that he portrayed himself as a foreign student. Mm-hmm. And I remember I didn't even know what Mombasa was. Only later on, upon going to school and learning a little geography, did I know that Mombasa was a place in Kenya. So although I don't recall a verbatim conversation that Barry said, oh, I am from Kenya, but I do remember this very odd word floating around, Mombasa. And then when I finally realized what that was in later years, where have I heard that before? Because it's such an odd word. I didn't know if it was a person, place, or thing. What the heck is a Mombasa? So I remember that floating around, and again, Barry portrayed himself as a foreign student. And that's how we all sort of said, oh, I guess Punahou must have some kind of a weird waiver for foreign students, and that's how he got in there. Because none of us could really understand it. He lived in a shabby apartment, and, only the rich kids went to Punahou. And I mean, you had to pull down some serious dough. And here's another little footnote regarding the improbability that there was any legitimate tuition paying there is the maternal grandmother supposedly worked for Bank of Hawaii as a VP. Well, let me tell you, I worked for Bank of Hawaii in 2000 and 2001. I was a systems analyst for them, and VPs are like a dime a dozen. There's got to be 150 of them there. There's a VP for every department. It means absolutely nothing. Well, let me tell you, Bank of Hawaii and all banks for that matter are notorious for paying peanuts. And there is no way that that grandmother was pulling enough money out of Bank of Hawaii to be able to send Barry to Punahou. No way. And how do I know this? Because I had looked at my own paychecks. I used to do sophisticated work for them. I mean, I had to be bonded. I did their asset transfers. I reconciled their mutual funds. I did all this blind posting. I had to sign a paper to say I'd be prosecuted by the SEC if I pushed a wrong button and the whole 9 yards, right? The FBI, fingerprints, everything. And I think I was making, $11.75 an hour to start with. And I used to have lunch with these VPs and stuff, and they were only making $3 or $4 more an hour than I was, and some of them been there 15, 18, 20 years. So what I'm trying to get at is whoever was paying for Punahou, it certainly didn't come from Bank of Hawaii.
Okay, which basically fuels the idea that he'd been put in place a long time ago, from the very beginning. I think so. I mean, because put it this way, if the people at Bank of Hawaii were making enough money to put their kids through Punahou, then how come all of their kids are not at Punahou? Of course, they don't make near enough money. I mean, you got to really pull it down. You got to be, a successful doctor, lawyer, or some kind of, hot shot. You got to be pulling down $100+ grand at least a year to be able to get your kid through that school. I mean, it was something like last time I checked, which was in the early 90s, or about 94-ish or something like that. It was about $800 or close to $900 a month. It's just the bare bones to start out a kid in kindergarten. And then remember, there's all these ancillary costs, too, if your kid's in certain programs and sports, cost of uniforms, cost of this, cost of that. So, you're talking a minimum of about $900 a month just to get your kid started out. And that's then. It's a lot more expensive now. So, you cannot be, you have to be able to pull down a significant amount of money to be able to get your kid through that school. Any theories on it?
And like I say, the idea that the grandmother, the word VP, she was a VP for bank. VP means nothing. There's, like I say, about 150 of them there. I worked in the same building. I worked for Bank of Hawaii Pacific Century Trust. I worked with all of them. And VP means absolutely nothing.
It means they didn't want to pay you for a raise. Yeah, it means they didn't want to pay you.
Exactly. I mean, like I said, I used to feel bad because I saw these people who'd put in 15, 18, 20 years. They were only making $3 or $4 more an hour than I was.
Okay, there you go. Now, I have a couple of questions coming in from the chat, so I thought I'd jump in with those real quick. Somebody was asking if you've had any other contact with the kids that you ran with during that era in Hawaii. Any idea of what happened to any of those people?
Yeah, I did try to do some research with a private investigator, and here's where I'm at with this. Well, for one thing, the majority of those people are likely to still live in Hawaii. And if you understand the mentality in the islands, people are not particularly politically proactive in the islands. There's kind of a mentality because of how the monarchy was overthrown. Essentially, the U.S. pointed cannons at Iolani Palace and overthrew Queen Kapulani. I think it was Queen Kapulani, or Liliuokalani, yeah. They basically, did a stick up and just snatched the monarchy. So there's like a real bad taste in the mouth for the federal government and stuff like that, right? So you're talking about a demography of people that are not likely to give a rip about the federal government, because it's almost like Hawaii's a little bit of a foreign country in some respects. In other words, aside from the military presence there's not a big sense of patriotism. So I think one of the reasons why people have not come forward is for that. Also, one of the luxuries I have is I don't have any kids. If I had kids or grandkids, maybe I would think twice about doing this kind of stuff. So maybe these people have families that they're, why would they put themselves or their family at risk for something that they don't even really care about too much in the first place? I'm motivated from a deep sense of patriotism and these types of things, but I can imagine that most of them may not be. And, particularly if they have careers and, different situations. So I found that unless I'm given the green light by any of them to out them out of respect to their safety and their family, I feel that it's not my place to do that. And if they feel compelled to come forward, I encourage that, and I'm trying to give an example that it's the right thing to do. But I've been kind of at a stalemate for other people coming forward. But like I say, I think it's because of the mentality in Hawaii that there's kind of there's a whole mentality there about wanting to get away from the federal government and not feeling like they're part of the federal government and that sort of thing. And the Haole mainlanders, and I can imagine how they are just not too interested in getting involved.
I see. So the majority of them were Hawaiian.
Or local, I mean, when you say Hawaiian, there's very few pure Hawaiians. So it would, these people were Portuguese and Asian and, half Hapahaole, Japanese, Korean, all the different types. And, so the word Hawaiian is, very, very few pure-blooded Hawaiians that are left. But
locals, basically.
Yeah, there was a couple, there's a couple white kids, and then most everybody had a brown skin. Yeah. I was kind of like the token Haole most of the time. Yeah.
Interesting.
so like I said, and these were all local kids. So, the likelihood that they still live in the islands is probably pretty great. So,
well,
and if some can come forward, but everything that I'm telling you regarding Gay Ray, this is all substantiated fact. So for your listening audience, with just a few clicks, you can search this stuff out, and with very easy access, you'll read all about Gay Ray and how he was murdered, and in fact, just go to YouTube. You can get a whole bunch right there on YouTube about that.
And so he was known in this clique of yours, or in this, the local kids or whatever in the summers, as Barry Soetoro. And
actually, I didn't know Soetoro. They used to call him Popolo Soetoro. And Popolo is a term, like how Haole is white, Popolo is for black, right? So that's the only reason I remember Soetoro, because I don't think at any point in time Barry ever came up and said, "Hello, I'm Barry Soetoro." But I remember that Popolo Soetoro floating around.
Yes, because I was thinking, well, maybe one of the reasons that you haven't found these people, if indeed you were looking to, I don't know, disturb their lives and start everything from scratch and open up about all this stuff, is that I'm assuming a lot of last names were not exchanged when everyone was just hanging out.
Absolutely right. See, remember, we were all talking pidgin. This is all in a really heavily slang type of dialogues. So no, we didn't speak like that. So I only came up with the Soetoro thing as a part of my memory. It's just because of that little halfway rhyming Popolo Soetoro kind of thing. But other than that, I probably wouldn't have known Barry's last name. And supposedly he used Obama while he was at Punahou. But remember, Barry's a chameleon. He's mentally ill, so he compartmentalizes. So he probably had a little summertime persona. Being that he was doing drugs and stuff, he might have just used Soetoro. So if the cops rousted him, he'd probably give the name Soetoro instead of Obama. I had never heard Obama. In fact, I did not hear of Barack Obama until 2008.
So all of a sudden one day
I didn't know.
all of a sudden one day we'll cut ahead to that for a minute and then maybe jump back to a few more of your observations regarding his behavior back then. But okay, so you're going through life, and then all of a sudden it's 2008. And you see Barry Soetoro, aka Barack Obama, running for president, and becoming president, and so how did that? I mean, what happened?
I thought it was hilarious that he changed his name, and what I did, now in retrospect, I know it was wrong, but what I did is I thought, well, I knew what a scumbag Barry was back in the 70s, but you know how some people can grow up, mature, have an epiphany, go to rehab, whatever, and straighten their life out. So I did not automatically assume Barry would be as dangerous as he's turned out to be. So of course, I certainly registered the name change. I thought that was hilarious. And I was just sort of sitting back, I think, like the rest of America and observing the guy. Just so happened that I had a job that I was traveling constantly all the way up until 2010. So during that time, I kind of was not plugged in. It was taking all of my energy and my time to perform this job. So I wasn't watching television at all. So I was just very much unplugged. By the time 2010, I'm starting to see, I'm back home based. I'm, back living in my house and, in other words, not on the road anymore. And then I'm starting to see the same old patterns. I'm starting to see that same old Barry, and I'm seeing that pathological lying. And I'm thinking, oh my God, he's still the same guy. So now I'm getting worried, and I'm telling my story to anybody who's listening, and I am screaming it from the rooftops. But I'm not yet on the media because I didn't even know how to plug into the media. I'm not in that industry. I'm not in that life. So it just sort of. The one thing that I did is I thought, well, what am I going to do? Call the FBI and say, hey, I knew this creep back in the 70s, want to open up a case? So I thought, well, maybe if I come in with some actionable intelligence of some kind about what a freak the guy really is, then maybe they'll listen to me. So I had a police officer friend who let me look at a database, and I took down all of Barry's fake Social Security numbers that he'd used throughout the years. So I thought, being armed with that, and I called the FBI several times, and they just simply summarily dismissed me. In other words, they're protecting him, and it's a crying shame. I guess when the FBI is not setting up fake terrorist plots, they're protecting Barry. It's disgraceful. But they literally.
It's in the contract.
Yeah. So they dismissed me summarily. So now I knew at this point I'm not getting any help from any law enforcement agency. So I'm still screaming it from the rooftops to friends, family, acquaintances, to whoever's going to listen. Watch out. This guy's seriously mentally ill. Watch out. And it was only up until I did the Manning report and how that came about. I'll give the Reader's Digest version. I made a small financial donation to the kitchen that they have there. They have they feed the little kids before they go to school there in Harlem, give them a hot breakfast. And so I just made a small donation. It just so happened to get Mrs. Manning on the phone, the wife of Pastor Manning. And I said, by the way, she processed the card. Here's my story. I knew this guy. And literally that day, within, 20 minutes later, I was on the air, and I did that very first interview, not thinking any more would come of it than that. And then, of course, those numbers went crazy, and then other shows picked it up. So I actually got on the alternative media scene in a very unusual way, and it's kind of like God did it or something, because I honestly did not know how to. I mean, if you're not in the industry, who do you call? Hi, I'm Mia. You want me on your show? I'm nobody from nowhere. So I would have come out a whole lot earlier, except for a set of circumstances, partly because in the beginning I gave Barry the benefit of the doubt, partly because I was unplugged as far as being politically active, and also because I didn't really know how to plug into the media.
Mm-hmm. And also you're marinating.
I had nothing noteworthy.
Yeah, and you're marinating what's going on. You're watching, he was, the rock star in 2008, and then, public receptivity, public opinion of Barry, or Barack Obama, started to falter, obviously, and everybody started to really regret. the election, and we're going to get into that in a little bit because
let's get into the election fraud. We know that Barry was never elected in 2012. Your listening audience needs to know this. Mm-hmm. So even if you're in camp and you know that Barry is a nutbag, you say, well, he was elected by the people. No, he wasn't. And we're going to talk about all the evidence that points that he was never elected in 2012.
Okay, yeah. If you want, we can start getting into that right now. I think it's a good time to. Okay. Let's do it. We have.
Okay, well, I can preface the story a little bit with. I think a lot of it starts with Senator Chuck Hagel, former senator of Nebraska, who was the Secretary of Defense prior to the one we have now. And so essentially he was the CEO, in 1992 he was the CEO of Election Systems and Software, the acronym is ESS, Diebold Electronic Voting Machines. And so anyway, he kept millions in stock options after he left that company and declared that he was going to run for the U.S. Senate in Nebraska. Now here's the interesting thing about this. Now, when Hagel runs for office, he's a virtually unknown candidate. He has no political life prior, so he comes from nowhere and wants to just jump into being a senator. He has no political presence whatsoever. And Diebold electronic voting machines were used in virtually all of the precincts in that election. So he ran against a very popular former governor, Ben Nelson, whom all of the exit polls said that Nelson was going to clean his clock. I mean, Nelson was a clear front runner. All the polls indicated that. Now, wait for this percentage. I think people are going to laugh. So Hagel's first time out of the gate, he wins by 83%. He takes 83% of the vote. Get a virtually unknown candidate running against a hugely popular governor.
Who happens to
I mean, just right there, that stinks. Who wins by 83% when you've done nothing before that, right? So what I'm getting at is
being the CEO of a computerized voting machine company.
And the Seidel software is owned by George Soros. Wow. We can get into that miscreant, George Soros. I mean, look at the players. So now what it looks like to me is that Hagel was appointed as Secretary of Defense as a payoff. It sure smells like a payoff to me. Mm-hmm. So by 2012, Barry was pretty much universally despised in this country. The overwhelming majority of the population had had enough of Barry's lies and his scheming and hustling and, putting legislation through under the cover of darkness, and we don't know about it till it's too late, and, the whole 9 yards. So I think Chuck Hagel is the smoking gun for why, and also it's already been proven. There's documentaries out there. They're both on YouTube and Netflix, how these machines have been investigated. I believe I sent you a link, Angela, about that, where it's already been proven where you vote for candidate A and it racks up 2 or 3 for candidate B. Mm-hmm. Remember, if we remember back, you had the Black Panther standing out in front of the voting places, and then, the dead people voting and the people going in 20 and 30 times to vote and that sort of thing. So there was huge amounts of fraud in 2012. Mm-hmm. So not only is Barry illegitimate in the way of his qualifications, mm-hmm. but he's absolutely illegitimate that the people never voted him there. Mm-hmm. So you've got a complete interloper from all angles. I mean, this guy needs to be grabbed by the scruff of the neck and thrown in a jail cell, period. So, I think it's important for people who are still not completely awake to think, well, we may not like him, but he was elected. Get that out of your head. He was never elected in 2012. And then when Hagel runs again for a second term, he's eclipsed his margin from the previous landslide to even more than 83%. So these people, they're full of hubris, these just outright criminals. I mean, they're not even trying to hide it, it seems like. I mean, they're so cavalier with their crimes that, to try to these percentages that even Hagel did are laughable. So, and then, of course, like I say, in 2012, the Diebold electronic voting machines were used in virtually all of the precincts. Mm-hmm. And that's an easy search, too. So, like I say, I'm not starting a religion. I'm not asking for people to have faith in me. Everything I'm telling you, you can substantiate for yourself with a few clicks. and you're going to find out that all the research has already been done, and the evidence is huge that points to that voter fraud in 2012. Mm-hmm. He may have had people bamboozled in 2008, but not by 2012.
Yeah, and that was an interesting ride. I mean, I remember other people from other countries in the 2008 election. Well, actually, it would be 2008, where he started in 2009. And interestingly, that is when Chuck Hagel stopped serving as a senator from Nebraska. Yeah, exactly. So let's see, what did he gave it up, and he resigned in 95. Well, actually, he resigned, supposedly, I have a few different notes here. He resigned for that position in 95, but he kept millions in stock options, declared, that he was going to run for the Senate, and then he only did 2 terms as a senator. But then, like I said, you have a completely unqualified guy. I mean, Chuck Hagel has 0 for qualifications for a position like that. And then, doesn't it smell like a payoff to you that, you've got a completely unqualified guy that now and that's a lucrative position. I mean, if you want to talk about backroom deals, that's the place where you want to be with that military-industrial complex, Mm-hmm. I'm sure, he's made himself a huge chunk of change, and I don't mean his payroll. So, and now, and he's backpedaled a lot, like since he's been replaced. I think even old Chucky has become disillusioned with Barry as he's kind of done some backpedaling about, just how crooked things are. I mean, clearly Hagel's crooked and a criminal, but, for the voter fraud part. But even I've heard some little speeches of his, and he's made some waves where, I think he was looking to jump ship for a while, but that's another story. But the point is that Barry was never elected in 2012, and all the evidence points to that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, obviously, this is a guy who's had a successful track record of the voting machines being easily manipulated for voter fraud. So it is pretty
absolutely, and you can't even track it. Like when they're hacked, the software is designed in such a way that you can't even determine who hacked it when. And that's, like I said, there's documentaries made on this. It's all been uncovered. This is common knowledge and that sort of thing. And, this is what's the important thing is anytime Barry opens his mouth about anything, just know it's a lie. It's not going to be something in your favor. Barry was installed to do as much destruction on America as possible with the time that he has. Mm-hmm. That's his job. That's what his handlers want. So, when Barry tries to do anything, know that it's always going to be damage in his wake, always. There's nothing going to, you heard the Midas touch? Well, everything Barry touches turns to manure. Mm-hmm. He's like the little worm in the apple that's rotting the apple from within.
From within, yeah. I mean, he's definitely within.
Yeah, he's the little worm that rots the apple from within. Because you can't knock America over. You can't destroy America by coming to her shores because we're too big and we're too strong. But, it's a little worm. Barry's he's trying to rot it from within, and that's the strategy.
Okay, so now, in your opinion, and in many Americans' opinion, Barack Obama, a.k.a. Barry Soetoro, is a puppet in position and has been put there by the powers that be for their own agenda. And you want to know who those powers are. Who's the shadow government?
Sure. I have a little easy solution for that just for your listeners. Okay. You take a look at these intelligence agencies. They have the most sophisticated technology on Earth. They have huge amounts of resources, huge amounts of personnel. I mean, we all know about what the poppy fields in Afghanistan are for and all that black money and everything else. Nobody's getting fooled about this stuff. So when you see that these intelligence agencies are sitting there doing nothing, not even bothering to expose Barry. It takes little guys like you and me and people like us to do all of their work for them. I mean, tell me I can find things on my laptop with a regular internet connection, and those with the most sophisticated technology on Earth cannot. So when you see these entities that should be doing something that are doing nothing, those are the culprits. That's how you spot who's involved.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And he seems to be the, for lack of a better term, the perfect candidate for this. You know, he was put in place early. One of the things that you have alluded to is his, and many have actually, his personality disorder, the narcissism. You know, he's got a narcissistic personality disorder, I believe is the correct terminology.
That's correct. It's one of the worst types of sociopaths that you can be.
Yeah, with basically no regard for others' feelings and that type of thing.
Correct.
Yeah, and so
that's right. He has no capacity for empathy, and he was even like that when he was a teenager. You could tell that he had some strange loop playing in his head that was completely displaced from reality. You could, in other words, even a layman could sit back and watch his behavior and say to yourself, there's something really wrong with this guy.
And that could have been either that could have been caused by the drug use, or the drug use could have just been a factor in that. Because
everybody was getting high back then, so I can tell you that there was a difference between somebody who just used drugs and what Barry acted like.
Okay.
Barry had I was around everybody was getting high back then. He was different. His thing was one of being completely displaced from reality. In other words, certain reality is going on around him, and he's got some fantastic loop that's playing in his head.
Something grandiose,
that has no relation to reality. Just like today.
As though he's got no reason to really worry about what's happening around him. Do you think he knew back then that he was in place for all of this? When do you think he found out?
I'm a little skeptical about that. I don't think that the selection process had been finalized. I think there was probably several candidates for this Manchurian candidate. I bet you there was probably 10 of them, and then they were weeded out and selected, and as time went on, and determined, because Barry was selected because he is a sociopath. That was part of the requirements for the job description. So I don't think Barry was slated for the big job that early on. Okay. I think that came along a little later. I think. It's only my speculation on that.
As his personality disorder basically grew into whatever he is today. And my question about that is, why would that person become a politician, et cetera? Apparently you're saying that he doesn't really care about the needs of his constituents. He's more in it for the rock star vibe, for the fame.
It's called narcissistic supply. So essentially, he's in it for the narcissistic supply, which those types of people with that type of psychiatric disorder crave. They crave the adulation. They crave that, like you say, the rock star vibe. For your audience, there's a doctor, a PhD, is one of many. There's MDs, PhDs that have diagnosed Barry. He has 5 of the 9 diagnostic characteristics to qualify him as having this mental illness.
And what is the name of that again? The mental illness?
Dr. Sam Vaknin. It's Vaknin, PhD. He does a really excellent job of spelling it out for you in a very eloquent way and describing the characteristics of Barry's psychiatric disorder. This guy's a world expert on that particular type of illness. So he's a good guy, just with a couple of clicks. Even on YouTube, again, you can easily pull him up. And he'll describe to you all the different, the reasons why he made the diagnosis. But like Dr. Steve Pachenik, MD, who's a psychiatrist, he recognizes that Barry is a sociopath. The best and the brightest in the psychiatric world have diagnosed him. I'm only a biologist, so clearly that's not my field. So I'm not the one that diagnosed him, but the best and the brightest in the field have.
Interesting.
So Barry's as Looney Tunes as they come.
And that would also be one of the reasons he makes a number of appearances on talk shows and that type of thing. Whether he's doing a dance with Ellen or he's reading cue cards on one of the late night talk shows. I mean, it's all in jest, but it's really him smiling and being like the cool guy and basically having everyone adore him for being funny, cool.
That's the narcissistic supply.
Right.
And without that, he would disintegrate. If you want to know how to to really get rid of Barry is just boo him wherever he goes. Boo, Barry, you suck.
Mm-hmm.
You know, take away that narcissistic supply. He'll evaporate like the Wicked Witch of the East when you threw the water on him in the Wizard of Oz. I mean, he requires that narcissistic supply.
Mm-hmm. Before I became a truther, at least on the radio, etc., I remember reading about a few things that perked my interest regarding Barack Obama and his need for adulation, etc. That he often, checks all social media, all Twitter feeds, etc. He wants to see what they're saying about him each day, and it really sets him into a particular tone for the day. If he's feeling that that the judgment call on something he did is not necessarily positive, and I'm assuming that his handlers and people that are around him in general, which may or may not be his official handlers, if you can pardon that phraseology, that they probably try to keep him away from a lot of the negative press. Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned we're going to hit a break in about 1 minute or something like that, so we may have to hit this at the top of the hour, after the top of the hour. But yeah, there we go. There's the break. So we'll be back in about four minutes, Mia. So please get yourself a beverage, and we'll be right back, everyone.